Okay, so I think actually we should kick off. So huge number of people already on, so thanks for joining. Welcome to our Safe Credentials webinar. This is one of a series of webinars on the topic of digital credentials and what's known as self-sovereign identity. Last week we had a really excellent session actually with the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, GLIFE, on digital credentials for organizations, which was absolutely fascinating. And it showed how this isn't just about identity for people. Credentials can be used for organizations and things as well, and often to do with things that have nothing to do with identity as well. The week before that, we covered the higher education sector with Digitary, and they provide digital qualification certificates for universities around the world. And the need for remote learning is growing hugely at the moment. So it's sure to be a rapidly emerging use case there for higher education and credentials. So let's have a look at the agenda for today. Just jump on the next slide, Alex. Thank you very much. Oh, the question already. Yes, this will be recorded, by the way, so I'm just going to come on to that. We are recording this webinar. All the previous ones have also been recorded, and they're on our website at evernym.com/webinars. So if you look on there, you'll see them all. Normally it takes us a couple of days to edit them and then put them up. So today the topic is all about safe credentials. What are they? What makes a digital credential safe? And what decisions do you need to take when architecting a credential solution to ensure you protect privacy and enhance security? And we'll hear from people who are in the midst of doing exactly that right now. As we go through the webinar, and this is a bit of a different format to most previous ones actually, because there's going to be a lot more Q&A. So we love audience questions. The last one we had, even though we went over by about 20 minutes, we still had 30, 40 odd questions that we hadn't managed to answer. So we love that. Please put your questions in the Zoom Q&A. You'll see it there. Drop them in there, and we'll devote a substantial amount of the webinar to those questions. Now, on to our guests today. My guests today are Julie Esser from CULedger. Julie, would you like to do a quick intro?
Sure, thanks, Andy. Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Esser. I'm Senior Vice President of Marketing Communications for CULedger. I'm responsible for developing activities around building awareness and engagement for the organization. I've spent my entire career, 30 years plus, in the credit union industry, and was one of the key contributors of organizing CULedger 3 years ago now. CULedger, if many of you don't know about the credit union industry, credit unions are financial cooperatives, and around the world we represent about 85,000 credit unions from 118 countries and more than 274 million members. CULedger is a credit union service organization. It's credit union owned, and we exist to provide a trusted peer-to-peer service network of verifiable exchange for financial cooperatives.
That's awesome. Thank you, Julie. Let's move on to Bryn Robinson-Morgan. Bryn, please tell us all about yourself.
Well, thanks, Andy, and thanks for the opportunity to join the panel today. So as you mentioned, my name is Bryn Robinson-Morgan. My official job title is Vice President, but I think actually within the organization I'm referred to as the Identity Geek. So I've been at Mastercard for 18 months, but I've worked in digital identity and identity more broadly for many more years than that. So it's really great to be working for an organization that shares my passion. Mastercard believes that every individual in the world should be the owner of their own identity, and that they should be able to define it, protect it, and use it to advance their goals. So safe credentials is a great way of achieving that mission, and I'm really looking forward to the session and talking about it.
Cool, thanks, Bryn. And moving on, our last guest is Evernym's own Chief Architect, Daniel Hardman. Daniel, would you like to do a quick intro as well, please?
Hi, everybody. as Andy mentioned, I work on architecture at Evernym. I also work in various community circles, including Hyperledger, the W3C CCG group, and at the Decentralized Identity Foundation on the DIDCOM and identity working groups there. And I have a background. Before I came into this space, I was working in cybersecurity. I worked for Blue Coat and Symantec. And so the safety of this new technology, credentials that we're inventing together, is something that resonates very strongly for me.
Thanks very much, Daniel. And Daniel's brain is one of the most valuable things in Evernym, so we're delighted to have you on, Daniel, as well. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Just as a quick reminder, any questions, put them in the Zoom Q&A, please. We'll capture them all and attempt to answer as many of them as we can. Greetings, Lynn, as well, from Vancouver, for joining. Thank you very much for coming on today. Yeah, put them in the Q&A. We'll cover them. And if you needed reminding again, we are recording this. So let's kick off. We're going to have a small session here, just me introducing this concept of safe credentials and a very high level of what they are. Then we're going to get into the nitty gritty that I'm sure you're all really interested in. Firstly, let's talk about what a digital credential is. So next slide, please, Alex. Called verifiable credentials or digital verifiable credentials. This is a place where there's a lot of terminology, so I'll just call them digital credentials here. The easiest way to think of it is a digital version of a physical credential that we all have at the moment, like a passport, a driving license, an employee ID or a credit card, etc. And those physical credentials, we carry them with us and we can use them wherever we want, and it's our choice to show them or not. A digital credential is the equivalent of that. It can carry the same data, but what is changing is the bearer of the data is now digital rather than a piece of paper or a piece of plastic. And that digital bearer has special cryptographic watermarks on it that allow anyone to verify the authenticity of any credential anywhere in the world, whatever that credential may contain. So you may be asking, this sounds great, why aren't the organizations that issue us with physical credentials already issuing us with digital ones that are actually going to be really useful for us in the digital world? It would reduce a whole load of friction and increase security if we could prove online who we are in a fraction of a second. And the reason that they don't do it already is because until recently there hasn't been a standardized way of doing so. But there is now, and the standards are evolving really, really fast. The decentralized identifier or DID standard and the verifiable credential standard are two to talk about. Without going into the semantics of whether they're approved standards yet or recommended, etc., have a look at the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, for those two things, DIDs and verifiable credentials. But these digital credentials, they can do an awful lot more. They can apply equally to organizations and connected things. And identity is a subset of what you can do with credentials. Okay, there's a lot of noise about self-sovereign identity. That is one use case for digital credentials. They enable new types of digital relationships, and they enable what's called trust at a distance, or is now being referred to actually as trust over IP, which is a whole huge area of interest. So next slide, Alex. Just a quick check on terminology. Throughout today's session, we're going to be talking about issuers, holders, and verifiers. Issuers issue digital credentials. Could be an organization, could be a passport office, could be a gym, it could be an airline. Holders hold credentials, could be people, organizations, or things. And verifiers request proof of something and then verified. So you'll hear us talk about issuers, holders, and verifiers. Okay, quick terminology check done. Things are moving really fast in the digital credential space now. Since COVID-19 happened, at Evernym, we've seen an exponential increase in interest as people realize the importance of establishing and maintaining remote trust. And as with any fast-moving technology, it's often tough to keep pace with new developments, and it's even harder to cut through the noise to find the key facts. We saw this actually in self-sovereign identity, as that really took off a couple of years ago. Quite a lot of companies were purporting to be SSI enabled, when in fact they were nothing of the kind, and we call that SSI washing. Jump onto the next one, please, Alex. As more people are creating POCs and pilots and moving into production, as we'll see shortly, we decided to create a little guidebook for those who are designing and designing and implementing digital credential solutions, to check if they're doing so in a manner that properly protects privacy and enhances security of the users. And we boiled it down to 5 key tests. So let's kick off with those now, and then we're going to spend the majority of the session in the Q&A talking through these. So the first test is all about correlation. The thing that a lot of people hate most about the internet is the fact they're followed around everything they do. Somebody's monitoring what they're doing all the time. With digital credentials, you've got the issuer and the verifier and the holder in the middle. If the verifier has to connect and speak to the issuer in order to verify a credential, then that issuer will know where you're using your credentials. And every time you're using your credentials, the issuer will see that, and they can correlate everything you do. And that's a big privacy disaster for you. So you want to avoid what we call this phone home problem. You want the verifier to be able to check the authenticity and validity of your credentials without having to contact the issuer. Okay, so that's number 1. Next one. Test number 2. Are you using what we call safe signatures to prevent correlation? Now, this starts to get into the detail of this cryptographic watermarking I referred to earlier, and Daniel will be fantastically well placed to talk about this in more detail. When an issuer signs a credential and gives it to you, their signature is unique to you and that credential. When you then use that credential to prove something about yourself, if you share the issuer's signature, every time you use that credential, you'd be sharing that same issuer signature. And that's like creating a new global super cookie to track you in everything you want to do, because every verifier will be able to share that issuer signature and say, oh, we've got Andy here, and we've got Andy here, we've got Andy here, and then they can track everything you do. So it's like a new kind of worse version of a Google ad ID. So with safe credentials, you only share proof that the issuer has signed the credential. You're not sharing the issuer's signature. Okay. So some of these tests, you have to understand that some of the nitty gritty of the detail in order to realize why they're important. That's a really important one. Next one up. Are you ensuring portability and interoperability? So what we want to avoid is lots and lots more identity silos that don't talk to each other. Proprietary solutions keep people locked in. The reason the internet has expanded across the world is because anyone can set up a website as long as it uses a set of protocols. They just work, and anyone can view the website, and the website can be about anything. It's very, very different to the old days of like closed walled gardens of AOL or CompuServe, for example. So portability and interoperability is key, and this is an area that is expanding rapidly at the moment. And I should also clarify that, you know, nobody at the moment passes all 5 of these tests. Okay, some are further ahead than others, but you want to be saying, what are you going to be doing about interoperability? What are you going to be doing about portability? How does your roadmap take us down this route if you don't have it already? Next one, please, number 4. Are you enabling flexibility and data minimization? So it's important to be able to share just one element or 2 elements of a credential rather than sharing the whole thing. And also it's important to be able to combine attributes from different credentials into a single proof. So you can satisfy the sort of challenge, give me 2 proofs of address and a proof of citizenship in one transaction, okay? So flexibility and data minimization, you don't have to share the whole credential for every transaction you want to do. You just share the pertinent pieces of it. And you can combine data from different credentials together, and they can all be verified in one go. So that's flexibility and data minimization. And the last one, are you ensuring trust goes both ways? Really, really important here. What does this mean? Well, think of all the bank fraud that takes place because people can't verify they're talking to their bank, right? They're talking to a scammer. When I call my bank, how do I know it's my bank? They do a load of checks on me, but where are the checks I can do on them? So with proper, safe credential exchange, I can verify it's my bank and my bank can verify it's me. So establishing mutual trust is really important, and having that trust going both ways. So next one, please, Alex. So we've written about these in more detail on a couple of articles on our blog. So evernym.com/blog, you'll see those there. One goes into each of these 5 tests in a bit more detail. And then there's a much more detailed one from Daniel, the train wreck one. If you don't get this right, the danger is that you're creating a new global super cookie, or you're seriously compromising the privacy of your users, or you're creating something that won't scale because every verifier needs to talk to every issuer through APIs that need to be set up and so on. So have a look at those, and we're going to dive into this in a bit more detail now. So let's come on to the main events, if you like, the Q&A piece. I'm just going to be going through with each of the panelists in turn and sort of probing a little bit on what they're doing in the space, because I'm sure you're keen to understand a bit more detail about what CULedger and Mastercard are up to. But also let's focus in on why safe credentials are important for their use cases. So I'll tell you what we'll do. Alex, do you want to just stop sharing for a second? Thank you very much. You can see us in all our glory. So let's actually kick off with Julie first. So CULedger and Member Pass, can you just give us a bit more detail about what's it all about? Why is it important for you, and what are people going to do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So CULedger began its quest on this journey back in 2016. And that was at the start where distributed ledger technology or blockchain started to become more of a buzzword. And so credit unions recognized that there could be some significant value of the use of this technology in their operations and for their members. And so they invested just less than $1 million of expense dollars towards a research to action kind of project. And the focus of that research, or that initial use case, was around the use of digital identities in a call center environment. Call centers and financial institutions are the weakest link as it relates to authentication, and it's a dream come true for fraudsters. There's a lot of account takeovers that happens. People, information of themselves are all over the web, the dark web. You think about how you interact with your financial institution today. You're met with having to authenticate using knowledge-based questions, and those answers are all over the place. And so Member Pass is our decentralized, our digital credential. It is the simplest, most secure way to verify members across any channel that the credit union has, whether they are calling into the call center, they're going into the branch, or they're logging in online. And there'll be multiple other channels that will exist in the future, because we don't know what the digital world will end up being. And so what is really great about this is it provides a seamless way for members to interact with their credit union, regardless of the channel that they use. So from a member experience standpoint, that's huge, and something that credit unions value extremely. In this world of pandemic, identity verification, identity validation is becoming harder and harder. And, credit unions had to essentially become digital financial institutions overnight. Their plans accelerated overnight. And so it forced a lot of members to use more remote channels, which created more of an awareness of why digital credentials are so important.
Very cool. And we'll come on to some of the details about what they're saying to you, these credit union leaders, what they're saying to you in a second. I just want to throw the same question over to Bryn as well. Mastercard and digital credentials, Bryn, what's the plan? What's going on at Mastercard? Huge organization. When Mastercard says something, people pay attention. What is happening there?
So we've got an awful lot going on at the moment. We're experimenting, we're building, we're identifying different use cases where we can see value for a safe credential ecosystem, but we're also running real world tests as well. So I work in the team that is behind the ID service, which Mastercard launched at the back end of the year. It's a smart, secure, and convenient service for digital identity. We're collaborating with a number of partners, and collaboration is really important to us. So both yourselves and CULedger are organizations that we get involved with and try and share knowledge and help each other out to make these ecosystems a success. One of the other organizations that we announced that we were running a real pilot with was a university in Australia called Deakin University. So it was interesting, Andy, that you mentioned the student use case at the top of this call. So overnight, all of a sudden being able to connect with students in a remote manner became suddenly really, really important to universities. But fortunately, we were already on the front foot with that one. So with Deakin University, we were looking at how digital credentials could help them to enroll and interact with their students. And if you imagine that the student's able to share their legal identity, so who they are, universities nowadays tend to accept students from all over the world. So expecting people to turn up with a bit of paper is very old school anyway. So being able to do that digitally is really important for the university. And also being able to bring things like your qualifications that enable you to enroll for that course. And then we think about the university itself and the relationship that they have with their students. And you've got universities where the university campus is a bit of a walled garden, if you will, but actually the student wants to do things outside of the university. They want to be able to prove that they are a student. So being able to go across that trust boundary with a digital credential that says, I am a student, this is the course that I'm studying. I can then go to a bookshop and I can get my course materials and I can get my discount for those course materials as well. Or thinking back to my own time at university, going in the local bars, being able to get my student discount for my beer.
Most important thing.
Most important to me. I think students nowadays are a little bit more mature than I was, but you imagine that having that digital credential, being able to say, I am a student, I'm a current student, giving my discount on my beer, but also I am over 18, over 21, so that I can actually buy that drink as well. And there's a long-term roadmap.
I was going to say, for Mastercard, this is a lot more than payments, right? Everyone thinks Mastercard, I've got a card, I can use it where I see the logo. And your background there says building trust in the digital world. So Mastercard's kind of branching out here into the whole, not just trust for payments, but trust for everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So payments are a digital credential. So expanding that ecosystem is a very natural step for us, and it's about changing relationships so that we get the lifetime relationship between organizations and users.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Very interesting. Okay, so let's just come back to Julie for a second, and let's bring this really slap bang into safe credential space. What are you hearing from the credit union leaders that you deal with about their requirements for digital credentials? Presumably you go and say, hey, we've got these great digital credentials. Once they understand what they are, they'll go, oh, hang on, what about this? What are they saying to you about security and regulatory compliance?
Sure. Just to give some background about credit unions a little bit more. So credit unions are regulated just like any other financial institution. So the smallest credit union that's only open on Sundays to serve the congregation of a church has to comply with the same compliance, privacy regulations as a regional bank down the street. Okay, so that's all on equal footing. There are, of course, the privacy rules that exist for financial services, GDPR in Europe, but the California Consumer Protection Act in California, and there are 13 other states that are looking at similar privacy regulations. So even though credit unions, the US credit unions might not have branches, some of them do, especially if they're military based, but any individual, if they have a membership even residing in Europe, they need to comply with these regulations. Same in California. If they're not headquartered in California, they have members there, they still need to comply with these regulations. The other thing that we're seeing is that regardless of all the channels that credit unions have, there are different authentication methods associated with that. So it's very much account-based type of identities that are being established. And those providers are in the middle. I don't want to call it intercepting, but they're kind of intervening in that member relationship that the credit union has. And credit unions have historically had very strong personal relationships with their members, just because of their association, their affiliation, this common bond that brings them together. And so now you move that to a digital environment, everything changed. I can't, see necessarily Andy coming into, and having this personal conversation. Hey, Andy, how you doing? Over the phone, right? And how do I know it's really Andy? So that's really important. The other compliance aspect is around KYC, or know your customer. So this is all a part of an anti-money laundering and combating financial terrorism regulations. And KYC, or know your customer, is a very small part of that regulation. And there's two aspects of it. It's customer identification and customer due diligence. And so all credit unions need to comply with that. And what makes that kind of unique in our situation, we could essentially create a compliance burden, if you will, into something very much value add, because there's no one that has to deal with these type of regulations like financial industry does. And so once the credit unions KYC their membership and issue member pass to their members, the interoperability play becomes a much more important aspect. The portability of those credentials, the interoperability, being able to use them outside of the credit union. Even though
so this is not just for use in the credit unions, and you're wanting to actively give the credit union members a digital asset they can use outside in the wider world as well. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I'll echo too Bryn's comments about the collaboration aspect. We are looking at how we can collaborate with other leaders like Mastercard, like other associations, like other service providers, so that we can, make that interoperability dream come true for the consumer, right? And allow them to use those credentials anywhere.
Yeah, so you're starting off with a use case that is, use it within your own credit union, but because you've got that credential, if the shop down the road wants to check you're over 18, or that hackneyed old use case, but if they want to check that, or you can get a discount because you're a member of the credit union, you can immediately use it outside of that that sort of credit union situation. Very cool. Okay, so let me come on to Bryn then. A similar sort of question, Bryn, actually. Tell us about sort of safe credentials within Mastercard then, and the bigger picture about how you can ensure you get human trust as well as the kind of machine assurance that you get with credentials.
Yeah, sure. So over the past few weeks, Mastercard has made a couple of really big announcements, one of which both your organizations were involved in as well. and that was becoming a founder member of the Trust Over IP Foundation. So Trust Over IP is about providing the full stack of standards and governance. But these standards aren't just about technology. It's also dealing with the human aspects that enable trust as well, such as legal contracts, liability, redress, privacy, user experience, and the independence and reliability around a credential as well, which is really important for KYC and AML use cases. And we also shouldn't forget about commercials as well. If people do things, they add value into a process, they can expect to be rewarded for the value that they add to that process as well. So we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of a commercial construct as well. And when you look at Mastercard, we have some experience of running multi-party schemes. You know, we're
yes, just a bit,
well
yeah.
known for doing that in payments. But if you look at what we've actually done, what our role has been in that payments ecosystem, it's about being a market maker. It's about being a convener of different entities. It's about orchestrating those entities. And it's also about providing the governance to that scheme as well. So the point that you made, Andy, digital credentials is just a really natural extension of what is the DNA of Mastercard.
Yeah.
The second announcement that I want to talk about is that we became members of the ID 2020 Alliance. If you look at the manifesto of ID 2020, there's a great alignment with what you're talking about in safe credentials as well. So it's not just about creating an identity infrastructure, it's about creating the right identity infrastructure, one that's a force for good, that ensures that there's an ability for everyone to prove their identity and have that as a fundamental, universal human right. And I think most of all, it's about designing it first and foremost for the benefit of people.
Yeah, and this is a really, I think, productive and proactive change here, because what we've seen in the digital world for some time is organizations wanting to say, well, I'm going to own the identity of these people, right? And protecting that. So Mastercard's kind of made this catalytic leap, if you like, to say, well, it's bigger than just Mastercard, this thing, because if we can establish, and the same thing with the CULedger work as well, if you can establish, give people credentials about their digital identity, and they can use them anywhere in an open ecosystem, that's going to be hugely beneficial for all the merchants in the Mastercard ecosystem, all the banks, and then people have these credentials, they can use them in different use cases. In fact, Atul Bhatt has asked a question, this is interesting, can these credentials be used more widely across government and healthcare services? Give us a quick comment on that, Bryn.
Absolutely, there shouldn't be any artificial boundaries by how credentials can be used. So yeah, having credentials that go across organizational boundaries, across sector boundaries, but also across national boundaries as well. That's very much at the heart of what we believe and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think the attitude of both Mastercard here and CULedger is just like, it's so refreshing in the digital world. It's really kind of leading the way, which is awesome. We just want more people to do exactly this. So let's come, actually, we've got a really interested audience, so questions already coming in. So any questions, put them in the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we can. And we've got a mixture of people here, judging by the questions. Some folks here are well steeped in the cryptography. So let's bring Daniel in here. Daniel, and you know, there's a strong focus in the 5 safe credential tests about preventing unintended correlation, or even unwanted correlation. So some people kind of defeatist, look, we're all going to be correlated anyway. I don't care, just take my data, right? What do you say to that?
Well, we are going to be correlated anyway, but there's degrees of correlation, and there's differences in who could correlate you, and there's differences in how much it costs to correlate. So if every person that I interact with, let's say a person that you know, I meet at a bar somewhere and talk to them kind of casually, and I give them my phone number, but I do it using verifiable credential technology. If that person has the same ability to correlate me as Google that spends $1 billion on a giant AI that correlates, suddenly we make the correlation problem dramatically different. Physical credentials don't have the correlation issue in the same way. They do have it to some degree, but we tend to show physical credentials to a human being that forgets a lot of stuff, right? We flash our driver's license, and the person sitting behind a counter or a desk or whatever looks at it quickly, satisfies themselves, and immediately forgets all of the stuff that was on there. But when we're talking about digital credentials, and we're talking about somebody that is capturing that information on a phone, we got to have a better answer. So yes, we'll be correlated anyway, but we need to change the cost dynamic so that there are incentives to not correlate. We need to hold people accountable when they correlate us. And we need to know what the bounds or scope of the correlation is when we engage in it. And all of those things require more safety than some of the systems that could be easily imagined. We have to be a little bit more careful.
Right, so it's changing the whole dynamic of it and making it, you know, very expensive to correlate, essentially, and providing protections that just don't exist at the moment. So let me lead on to another question. I'm just going to stay in the cryptographic detail here for a minute. Because Dennis Fung has asked a question, which is, how can the prover share the proof with a verifier without revealing the issuer's correlatable signature? So, all
Okay.
yours, Daniel.
This is a great question, but it's one that I have to be careful about answering because it can make people's eyes glaze over a little bit. So I'll give you the quick answer and then a slightly deeper answer. And if we really need to go deep, you'll have to hit me offline. But the quick answer is there is cryptographic black magic involved. The slightly deeper answer is that there's a whole category of cryptographic theory that gets into a topic called zero knowledge proofs. There's lots of different ways to do zero knowledge proofs, but the essential thing that you do is you prove to somebody characteristics about something you know in a way that it could not possibly be true that you know this stuff unless you're actually looking at the artifact that they're expecting. So a simple way of thinking about that, that in familiar context to us is, imagine that you're trying to prove to somebody that, you know, Fred is a member of a Major League Baseball team. Without showing somebody Fred's contract, if you can observe Fred walking into the building, putting on a uniform and going out on the field, you're pretty confident that Fred is a member of the baseball team, even though you didn't read his contract. In a similar way, you can demonstrate that a signature exists that has all the required characteristics without actually showing them a signature value.
Right, and you can use zero. Everyone's still with us. Okay, so essentially you're sharing proof you've got the thing signed without sharing the signature, and
Right.
and it's not just cryptographic theory; it's cryptographic practice. I mean, this has been around for some time, but
Well,
it used to be very expensive to do. But now, with the open source software in Hyperledger, Esser, for example, it's kind of free, right? The logic is there for anyone to use.
And this is commoditized, well-proven stuff. This is not a bleeding edge anymore. Entire cryptocurrency communities exist based on this. Many kind of privacy-preserving ones like Monero and Zcash use these technologies so that you can prove that you transferred money without disclosing all the details.
Yeah. Yeah, so proven tech, but now commoditized for everyone to use and built into the tech that both Mastercard and CULedger are working with. Okay, brilliant. So let's just come out of cryptography land for a second. And let's just try, just looking through the questions that have come in. Let's just try this one for Bryn. Mastercard's new ID service, yeah, there was a paper published, wasn't there, a little while back by Mastercard, referring to Active Directory from Microsoft as a framework that's been used, but little description of credentials, verifiable credentials, and DIDs and so on. So I take it as, this is from Michael Shea. I'm paraphrasing slightly, Michael. So things are moving pretty quickly at Mastercard, aren't they? Do you just want to sort of refer back to that paper from a while back and things that are happening now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I mentioned that we launched our service at the back end of last year, and part of that is we launched the idservice.com website, and on there we published our How It Works paper to give a bit more detail to people about what we'd actually been up to. So Microsoft for us are one of the organizations that we collaborate with and a really key partner in developing our service and enabling us to get to the position where we can have a global service that people can take advantage of. The question in terms of the technology that we're using, we've got some very clever people like Daniel within our organization who deal with the technical detail. So I can't give you too much of an answer in terms of technology. I'm the less clever person that takes that technology and takes those standards and then adds on top of it the service layer and the more human layers around identity. But one thing that I would say in terms of the platform that we're building on today and the direction that platform's taking and that Microsoft themselves are working on, it is all aligning around verifiable credentials and the standards that are forming under there. But whether it's a verifiable credential or it's a DIDCOM interface or it's an OIDC interface, I leave that to the techies to get on with. And in a lot of ways, you've got to develop things where the technology will continue to evolve underneath the platform, and the service that sits on top of it and the governance that sits on top of that are kind of technology agnostic, but definitely take the stuff that the clever people do in order to deliver a service.
Excellent, thanks. So things are moving really quickly by the sound of it. Let's just come on to the governance side in a bit more detail. So there's another question here, and I'm going to just ask you to do this one, Bryn, and then I'll come on to Julie as well. So a verifier who's received a proof from Andy, right? How do they know to trust the issuer of the credential that I used to create that proof? So you know, we've got some cryptographic voodoo happening that makes sure that the credential can go from A to B to C. How does the verifier trust the issuer and the issuer's onboarding process? So how have you thought about that so far? So Bryn first, and then we'll come to Julie on that.
So it kind of builds on my previous answer that there's a bunch of clever people that do a lot of clever things. And as I mentioned, we've got Daniel on this call. We've got a whole cupboard full of them at Mastercard who can come and do lots of clever technical things. But when we boil this down to human interaction, the 5 tests that you talked about, the average person on the street won't understand what those tests are, won't understand what verifiable credentials are, won't care about what verifiable credentials are. And if we bring that into the payment world, when we go to pay, whether it be at a physical location or it be on a website, at the storefront, there's an acceptance mark. It's the 2 conjoined circles for Mastercard that says, I can trust this. I know what's going to happen when I tap my card, and I know what protections that I've got if the amount of money that I'm expecting to pay is different, if the goods and services that I get don't meet that standard. It all sits behind that acceptance mark. And part of our job is taking that complexity away. The technologists take the complexity away from me so that I don't have to worry about it, but we're about taking the complexity away from real human beings so that they can trust the ecosystem. And that's the same whether it's payments and it's the Mastercard conjoined circles, or it's identity and it's the ID mark.
So that's really interesting, actually. So, you know, yes, you see the brand, you recognize it as a place to pay, and it's extending that into a place to, you know, to trust. You know, if they've got a Mastercard mark there, it's safe to use your credentials there, or a credential issued by somebody with that mark, it's good as well. So there's that governance piece around it. I'm going to come on to Julie now as well, because you got a lovely logo there, Julie, with MemberPass. Similar sort of intention, and how would someone know to trust Mountain West Credit Union as an issuer of an identity? If I was, you know, wanting to accept a credential for, you know, proving my proving someone's address to get a new electricity provider, and someone comes along with a Mountain West Credit Union credential, how do I know to trust that?
Yeah, great question. So from a technology side, we approached a little bit differently. So certainly the MemberPass logo is not intended to be a consumer-facing brand, because the credentials themselves are branded by each individual credit union. But saying that, in terms of how do we ensure the integrity of MemberPass for verifiers, we've taken a part of our implementation and created a digital trust registry. And this digital trust registry is made up of all credit unions. They're being verified. We have a lot of different ways that we can ensure the authenticity of a financial institution through the regulator, for example. And this digital trust registry will be used to for the verifier to check the public DIS and all the schemas and the revocation data, just to ensure you know, that the credit union is a bona fide issuer of MemberPass, so that nobody tries to impersonate some other financial institution saying, oh, I've been issuing these, and they really haven't. So that is our approach that we're taking on that.
All right. So this, I think what you both articulated then is this need for a combined approach of, and this is actually referenced in the trust over IP stack diagram. You know, the design is the need for human governance set of capabilities, and the need for some technical assurance capability or technical protocols that move the data around. So you can't have just one without the other. You need both. Yeah,
and, you know, and some of the feedback that I've seen on the Q&A is around the human governance side, is how do you ensure that they all want to do the same thing the same way? Well, you know, it's been pretty easy for credit unions because we are a collaborative organization. We're a collaborative industry. That makes it a lot easier. So we're not necessarily have all these trade wars with other financial institutions have with their markets, right? They compete heavily with each other. And so we look at ourselves as one unit, and you know, how we can improve ourselves as an industry to better serve consumers and members. They're going to do that. And you know, we've been seeing that a lot in just evaluating some of the internal back office processes the credit unions have. There's a lot of manual intervention in there. And so if we can use MemberPass as a way for them, for example, in the KYC example, that we can eliminate 60% of that manual work for them, oh yeah, everybody's happy. I mean, you know, that has a huge impact, not only for the member and their experience and getting onboarded, but also for the credit union too and their operations.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to rapidly come on to some other questions. So notice we got officially 8 minutes to go. We're likely to go a bit over. So some nice crispy answers for these ones. This is coming to you, Daniel, from Damien Glover. A really good question. Do digital identifiers and credentials have a role to play in making algorithmic decision-making safer? For example, could an AI prove it meets certain safety standards? So this is a really good one, right? How do you know an AI is the right AI and not an imposter AI?
Well, yes, absolutely. Can I put 2 or 3 exclamation points after that answer? This is a really hot field, in my opinion. There are lots of very complicated decisions that have to be made, and sometimes those decisions are probabilistic. A really good example of this right now in the news is decisions about COVID-19 choices. Should we let this family member visit their elderly relative in a care center? Well, how you do that could certainly be informed by data that derives from verifiable credentials. But you could imagine some kind of an AI calculating risk based on that. Now, the question that you asked, Andy, can you trust the AI? That's an interesting question as well. And there we get into the field of verifiable computation, which is where you can show that a particular algorithm actually was faithfully followed to get an answer. And if you combine those, so verifiable data as inputs and verifiable computation on the outputs, you get really interesting possibilities. So spot on, I love it. There's some work happening in the COVID Credentials Initiative around this very topic.
Right. And this actually comes on to another question from Oscar. Oscar van der Venter. Hi, Oscar. Verifying the verifier. The concept that some verifiable credentials are sensitive and should only be shared with authorized verifiers. So I'm guessing, maybe you're sharing your passport at the border force. How do you verify the verifiers? So it's a similar thing. If the verifier is an AI or if the verifier is the border force, you can actually ask them to prove. You could ask them to prove something about themselves. This is the mutual authentication stuff we talked about.
Yeah, it should be the case that everybody in the ecosystem plays by the same rules. You see the scenes from Wuhan in China where you have government minders that are checking the forehead temperature of people as they get on a bus. Well, what's to stop somebody from pretending to be a government minder and walking around with a thing and checking people's credentials as if they were the government, right? So what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to have your app where you give proof, but at the same time, you need to have your app configured such that it says, I'll give you proof if you can prove that you're really a government minder. Oscar knows that this very topic is very heavily explored. Well, very heavily. It's top of mind for people that are doing the COVID work. But it applies all over the place. Julie would like it to be the case that when people call the credit union, the people know that they're really talking to the credit union, not just the other way around. Right. So we need that same thing to be invertible. And actually, it's a really important characteristic that many systems are not building in. They're saying, well, our use case is we're an organization. We care about knowing what the other person's doing. And they're making no attempt to go the other way.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the key tests. Is it goes both ways. The trust. Okay. What we'll do, I think there's loads of questions coming in, so thank you all for them. We're not going to be able to cover them all as per usual. I propose we go 10 minutes longer. So let's just come on to another one. Actually, I can answer this one. This is from Nabil Ganmi. What blockchain is used by CULedger, Hyperledger, or Ethereum, ... So actually, CULedger is using the sovereign ledger. Thank you for that, Julie. And pretty much most of what we're talking about here is based on Hyperledger, Indy, Hyperledger, Aries, and Hyperledger Esser, which are the open source code building blocks on which pretty much everything that Evernym does is based around credentials and DIDs. Okay, we've done that one. Okay, we done that one actually from Robert Celeste, I think. Hopefully, Robert, we got close enough to that answer. Let's have a look at another one. For Julie, coming your way, Julie, here. This is from Michael Shea. With the different pilots that CULedgers run, well, not just pilots, but you're in production, can you comment on the costs of KYC as a part of the member pass initiative? So you're not quite using it for KYC yet, I don't think, are you? It's
not quite yet. We're conceptualizing around that and having some great conversations with credit unions about that aspect. There's a lot of excitement around that particular use case. As I mentioned, we could probably trim 60% of the manual process involved with KYC on behalf of the credit union. So yes, I mean, that's moving pretty quickly.
Yeah, and what about the, I think you had a target, didn't you, for authentication, call center authentication, where somebody calls in, from how long it would take to manually establish someone's ID to doing a credential verification? What were those stats?
Sure. So when we first started our pilots, we weren't necessarily testing the technology because the technology was already proven. We were really testing the member experience, and that's the most important thing that credit unions look for when implementing new technology. And so we had some credit unions that for high-risk transaction had a different way of authenticating than a low-risk transaction in the call center. Okay, so if you're a low-risk transaction, chances are they're just matching some data against their transaction processing system. For higher-risk transactions like wire transfers, we had a credit union that was actually asking the member to go to their nearest ATM and do a transaction so that they can monitor that transaction on the back end to ensure it's them. You know, so I mean, there's a lot of...
We're not talking like 60 seconds here, we're talking like an hour later.
No, I mean, overall, high-risk transactions can take anywhere from 3 minutes, but in that extreme case, obviously, it's going to take a lot longer than that. But we're able to reduce the call time, the authentication time from 3 minutes for higher risk to less than 10 seconds. And not only does it impact the actual call time itself, but has a great impact on hold times, especially now with COVID, and all the call volumes are spiking like 300%. And so that's a very important measurement for credit unions.
Very cool. And actually, just talking about KYC, we did a really good project in the UK with 5 banks, with Deloitte and Onfido, and with the UK regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, on actual KYC to prove that digital credentials could be used to onboard and get real financial products for real people. And, you know, brings the speed down to seconds as opposed to ages. You know, you don't need to fill in any forms. It's like, it is magic.
There's a lot of redundancy in that process. I mean, every credit union has their own way of doing things, and think about the collective costs associated with that. If we were able to streamline that for them, you know, the benefit that they could gain from that. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, very cool. So thank you for that. And it's really about reducing friction whilst also increasing security. And you've never been able to do that. It's either been you reduce friction, you reduce security, or you increase security and your friction goes sky high.
It's that now you can that they have to have, right? You know, we're willing to take on X amount of fraud to improve the member experience, and it's just that juggling match that they have to deal with every single day.
Yeah, and now you can have low friction and high security, which is like nirvana for people, I think. I'm just going to handle this next one from Azriel Chelst, asking, would you say Evernym is kind of like a middleware organization for digital verification? so no, absolutely not. The whole point of this is there aren't intermediaries needed anymore. So Evernym provide platforms for digital credential issuing and verifying for organizations. And we provide a mobile SDK for people who want to develop digital wallet apps as well. No, the whole point of the way digital credentials work is there's no intermediary watching everything you do, which is just massively refreshing. So coming your way, Bryn, here, and then we're going to come to Daniel. So can we ask Bryn to define identity in the context of Mastercard? I kind of think we've done this. So this is from Julian Wilson. So hi, Julian. What do Mastercard understand by identity, or want to imply when using the word identity? So it's a bit of a kind of terminology definition thing, which there's a lot of terminology around here. Do you want to just take that one, Bryn?
Yeah, sure. So we have legal identity, so our name, our date of birth, our address, or an identifier, depending on what country that you're in. But when we're talking about identity, it's the full collage of information about you. So it could be your legal identity, it could be your shoe size, it could be your COVID credential. It's anything that is connected around, I think you used the phrase earlier, Andy, an individual, an organization, or a device. So identity relates to any of those, and they can have lots of attributes or credentials connected with that entity.
Yeah, and this is an area that, again, there's a, I was watching a webinar last week where they spent pretty much an hour trying to define decentralized identity, or was it self-sovereign identity? And the phrase, a new phrase called trans-sovereign identity got introduced, at which time my head burst. But here it is. Just think of your natural life, that you have different personas in different situations, right? So, right now I have my work persona, and when this webinar finishes, I'll go and have a husband persona, because my wife will downstairs. And then I might have another persona, when I'm going out fishing and so on. And for each of them, this is probably not a good analogy. I don't have to prove anything to my wife, really, using credentials, I hope. But I might need to prove to the gamekeeper I've got a fishing license, for example, in that persona. And then I might want to get a bank account. I need to use something else. So that's what we do all the time. We have these credentials in paper and plastic format, and we use them in different ways. And we're just mirroring that in this world, but in a way that doesn't inject a middleman in the middle that watches everything you do, because you don't have that in the physical world. Why would you have it in the digital world? Okay, so we'll do a couple more here. What have we got? Oh, Daniel, coming your way from another one from Dennis Fung here. Is ED 25519, which is used in SSI, is it a popular signature scheme applied to other projects, or is it something you just kind of invented one Sunday evening?
Okay, so ED 25519 is the name for a particular elliptic curve. It was invented by Edwards, that's what the ED in it means, and it's been used by Bruce Schneier and other world-class cryptographers under contract with the US government, who asked them to do some research about certain things. But unlike some other curves, the government didn't get into the business of certifying it. They haven't said they don't like it. They haven't said they do like it. And for many people who have thick tinfoil hats, it's considered a good sign that the US government didn't certify it, because that probably means that they don't have some kind of a hack in their pocket.
A way to break it.
A way to break it. There are other curves that are very similar to ED 25519 that have been approved by the Chinese government, for example, by the Russian government. And it's possible to swap out curves if you have a need to do certain things and satisfy a government regulator. But basically, ED 25519 is considered kind of the state of the art, the most popular, and the most efficient.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much.
Question, Andy, that's exactly the answer that I would have given as well.
Yeah, I
completely
agree, Bryn. Yeah, I'm just conscious of your voice wearing out, Bryn. Let's cover another one. Actually, Daniel, coming your way, so leave your video on, mate. This is actually from Mark Haddle. Will credential verification and proofs be able to match the throughput of the larger Mastercard network, even with the DLT blockchain element? And I think this is a really good question. So I'm going to come to Daniel, not Bryn, even though it asks about Mastercard. But the ledger, it doesn't do very much here, does it? Do you want to just describe about sort of the peer-to-peer side and what the ledger is used for?
Yeah, the system scales with the number of peers. So if you say to yourself, well, how many people could we tolerate waving phones at each other? Well, however many people in the world there are that have phones can wave them at each other, and those phones can send bits back and forth. And largely, it doesn't create any scaling burden at all. The check-in with the network is just to check that you know what the signing key of an issuer is. So let's just suppose that Mastercard issues credentials for credit card type things. Everybody in the world needs to know what Mastercard's public key is that they sign stuff with, and they can look that up once. It probably could have millions of transactions per second happening with only hundreds of lookups of that particular piece of data. So there's not a scaling problem. Actually, that's one of the great virtues of self-sovereign identity.
Yeah, sorry, Dan, we lost you at a crucial point. So I'll just kind of paraphrase very quickly there. So a credential issuer needs to write some public key information somewhere, so other verifiers can find it and verify credentials, right? So where do they need to write it? They need to write it to a store somewhere that everyone trusts, and that store needs to have certain criteria, characteristics like tamper resistant, chronologically ordered, not run by one organization. And that's kind of the characteristics in a ledger. That's why ledgers are good for this. But once they've written that, they can issue 1 billion credentials without ever having to write anything else to the ledger anymore. Because the ledger is then used for reading those public keys, and you can cache them if you want to. But the actual credential exchange happens off ledger, and obviously you wouldn't want to write any credential information onto a ledger in the first place for privacy reasons. So credential exchange and did exchanges off ledger. So the ledger doesn't do very much, but it's a vital component in the whole thing. So I think we're 10 minutes past the hour. There's probably another 20 odd questions that we could go through, but I think we can't really cover all of those. We will answer as many of them as we can offline, but I think we need to wrap it up at this point. So thank you all to Julie and Bryn and Daniel for coming on and the excellent answers. I think we've covered a fair bit around safe credentials. We've gone deep into some of the technical detail, and also we've covered the human trust elements and the governance side of it as well. There's more information on evernym.com in the blog, so you can have a look at those articles there. And I would say to all the people who've attended, thanks very much for coming along, spending your valuable time with us on this webinar. Hopefully we got some of your questions answered, and the content was really useful for you. Watch evernym.com for the next webinar that come up. We do them once every week or 2 weeks, and we try and keep you entertained as much as we can. So Julie, Bryn, Daniel, thank you very much indeed. Fantastic stuff. And everyone who attended, thank you as well. That's it for today.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Cheerio. See you later.
Bye, folks.
Thank you.